Welcome one and all to the tale of Sarah finding home and family in a small town. Sarah stood in front of a tiny old house, her new home. It wasn't much, just a small, dusty house that had been left empty for years, but for Sarah, it was everything. After spending nearly 3 years being shuffled from office to office, and from one temporary home to another, the orphanage had finally found her a place to stay. It was far from luxurious, but it was hers. When Sarah was first told that the only available home was in a small town, she protested. She'd lived her whole life in the city, surrounded by noise and people. But when the bureaucrat handling her case told her she'd have to wait another year or two for a different option, she reluctantly agreed. People live in small towns too, she told herself. Maybe it'll even be easier there. Determined to make the best of her situation, Sarah rolled up her sleeves and started cleaning the house. The dust was thick, covering everything, but the house was partially furnished, which was a nice surprise. As she worked, a knock on the door startled her. Who could that be, she wondered, calling out a nervous yes. To her surprise, a woman in her mid-40s with a warm smile stood at the door. "Hello there. I was wondering who was tending to this old house," the woman said cheerfully. "I'm Ruby J. Grimes, or just Aunt Ruby. And you are?" Sarah smiled back. "I'm Sarah. The orphanage gave me this place. I know it's not much, but I'm grateful for it." Ruby frowned slightly. "This place? But it's barely livable. Oh, what a world we live in. You can't stay here alone, it's a nightmare. How about I get my family together, and we'll help you fix it up?" Sarah tried to protest, insisting she could do it herself since she had no money to pay anyone. But Ruby waved her off. "Let's get one thing straight, this is how things work in our town. We're one big family here. People help each other because they want to, not because they expect something in return. Got it?" Sarah nodded, feeling a bit overwhelmed, but also touched by the kindness of this stranger. Ruby didn't waste any time. She disappeared out the door, promising to be back soon with help. Sarah blinked, trying to process what had just happened, then smiled to herself. For the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. True to her word, Ruby returned with her husband Mike and their daughter Anna. They got right to work, helping Sarah clean and repair the old house. By evening, the house had been transformed. It wasn't perfect, but it was now cozy and livable. They all had dinner together, with Ruby talking about the town and its residents. Sarah couldn't believe how quickly she felt at home. Over the next few weeks, Sarah settled into her new life. She got a job as a nanny at the local daycare, and the townspeople, once they learned she was from an orphanage, showered her with kindness. They brought her food, helped her plant a garden, and made sure she never felt alone. At first, Sarah tried to refuse their generosity, but she quickly realized that this was just how things were done in this small town. One day, Sarah decided to spend her day off exploring the woods behind her house. She had never picked mushrooms before but knew the basics. The scenery was breathtaking, with the morning fog lingering in the low-lying hollows and the sun slowly rising behind the trees. Sarah felt a deep sense of peace as she wandered through the woods, her basket gradually filling with mushrooms. After a few hours, Sarah was about to head home when she stumbled upon an old, decaying airplane, likely from World War II. Curious, she climbed onto a rock to peek inside. To her shock, she heard a sneeze. She looked around, heart pounding, and peered inside the plane again. There, staring back at her, were the teary eyes of a little girl. "Who are you? What are you doing in there?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking slightly. The little girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old, reached out her hand. "I got mad at my dad and got lost. I wanted to see the plane but fell inside and couldn't get out. I was so scared," she said, her voice trembling. Sarah's heart ached for the child. "Come on, let's get you out of here. I'll take you home, and we'll find your dad, okay?" The little girl, Jessica, nodded and clung to Sarah as they made their way back to town. Along the way, Jessica told Sarah about her life. She lived in the city with her dad, who was great but always busy. This time she had asked him to take her to the woods, but he was too busy, so she had gone off on her own. By the time they reached Sarah's house, Jessica was exhausted. Sarah gave her some soup, but the little girl fell asleep before finishing it. Sarah knew she had to find Jessica's father, so she hurried over to Aunt Ruby's house for help. Ruby was already on it. The whole area is in an uproar looking for the poor little girl. Her father is going out of his mind, she said, dialing the phone. It wasn't long before cars pulled up outside Sarah's house and a frantic young man burst through the door. "Jessica, baby," he cried, rushing to his daughter's side. Jessica woke up and threw her arms around him. "Daddy, I'm sorry. I was so scared." Her father, Jared, held her close. "I'm sorry too, sweetheart. We'll go see the swans and listen for the cuckoo bird, I promise." Jessica looked up at him, then over at Sarah. "Can Sarah come with us?" Jared looked at Sarah, who felt a bit self-conscious but nodded. "Of course, if Sarah wants to." Sarah, Jared and Jessica became fast friends. Jared, an internet genius who could work from anywhere, rented a house in the next town over for the summer, and the three of them spent a lot of time together. They explored the area, laughed and talked about everything from swans to sunsets. As the summer went on, Sarah and Jared grew closer. One day as they walked back to Sarah's house, Jared held her hand a little longer than necessary, and they both smiled. It wasn't long before the whole town was talking about the new couple. A year later, Sarah and Jared returned to town with a special request. They wanted Aunt Ruby to be the godmother of their newborn daughter, a request that Jessica had made herself. Ruby, of course, agreed, her heart full of joy for the young family.